Oh, I'd like to welcome you to my lecture on poetic autopathography, writing through cancer. But before I enter into the more academic side of this lecture and I define what poetic autopathography is, I describe the psychological processes involved in having a cancer diagnosis. I describe the types of writing involved, and I exemplify them with my own work. I wanted to say a few words from a personal perspective. When you are diagnosed with cancer, you are touched by death. This does not mean that you're going to die from cancer. What it does mean, though, is that you come face to face with your own mortality. And when you come face to face with your own mortality, this has profound effects on the way you see the world, the way you see yourself. Not only that, the stages of being diagnosed with cancer and then handling the aftermath are involved with intense emotional feelings. And within that context, writing for well-being can help. It can elicitate certain understandings, emotional clarity in different ways. And to a large extent, that's what this lecture is about. If you are yourself going through this process, I very much hope the academic side of this lecture will be of value to you. And with that, let's go to the PowerPoint presentation itself.
As I said before, the title of this lecture is Poetic Autopathography, Writing Through Cancer. I'd like to start by just sort of summarizing very quickly some of the psychological responses to a cancer diagnosis and to coping with cancer more broadly once you've been diagnosed and start treatment. So the first thing I have to say, and I said it in my introduction as well, there's an intense emotional response when you're diagnosed. This is true for everybody as far as I know. But there are several particular features which come into play and are worth summarizing. There is, of course, a fear of death. There's distress about the dissolution of self. There's also a fear of separation. You worry about not being there for the people who you love and you care about, not being able to support them and not being with them. You worry about communication. Who are you going to tell? How much are you going to tell? What are you going to tell? And of course, there are, in some cases, real panic attacks, acute feelings of anxiety, which in some cases are really disabling. Longer term, past the initial panic and these intense feelings, and over quite a long period of time, there are a range of different psychological responses. There are changes in your future perspectives, the changes in your life story, how you understand yourself, your future, your priorities, your relationships. There's, of course, anxiety, consistently a sense of potentially impending doom, uncertainty about treatment, uncertainty about the future. There can be depression, sadness, sudden crying, hopelessness. There can be suicidal thoughts that some people have. There can be fear and uncertainty, concerns particularly about the future and the reoccurrence of cancer. You worry about the effectiveness of treatment. You can feel guilty, worrying about the causes of your disease, about being a burden, about forsaking other people. You can have mood swings. You can shift from sadness to anger. You can feel overwhelmed. You can have concerns about your body image as treatment changes your body in different ways. You might have brain fog or difficulty concentrating. You might develop a form of PTSD where you have strong emotional responses to treatment, diagnosis, and tests. And you can feel social isolation. You can even isolate yourself or feel useless or be marginalized. But beyond those psychological responses, it's important to point out that, among other things, illness, serious illness or otherwise, is an experience. It's deeply personal. It can be a very difficult human experience. And as such, it is open to the whole world and realm of autoethnographic research methodology. So let me go back and define what is an autopathography. Well, an autopathography, it's a genre of writing in which a writer explicates and tries to understand and express their experiences concerning their own illness. This has a long history in the medical literature, and it's usually done in relation to chronic diseases like cancer, neurological disorders, psychiatric conditions, and sometimes cardiovascular. I should also point out that most people who conduct an autopathography have been some form of writer beforehand, whether academics, journalists, or literary writers. So what is poetic autopathography? Well, poetic autopathography uses the writing processes and research methods of poetic autoethnography in order to facilitate cognitive insight and emotional clarity for the writer and sometimes for the reader concerning the writer's experience with serious illness. And we know something about the writing process is if you look through my previous work, published or in my lectures, some of which are online, we do know something about how this works. So as part of poetic autoethnography, we use generative writing, and we know that this elicits high levels of cognitive insight and emotional clarity about personal experience. We know that repeated generative writing increases cognitive insight, and we know that when there is enhanced engagement with the production of poetic images, this increases emotional clarity. So there's good reason to believe that these methods may be useful for well-being in relation to cancer. We also know something from poetry therapy with cancer patients, and what we know is that it can reduce anxiety and it can enhance the expression of emotions, both of which are good things when you are a cancer patient. So let me explain what I did with my writing through cancer. I used 4 different writing and expression techniques. First, most importantly, I think I used daily generative free writing, where I free wrote about my experiences of the day, the night, the previous day. This might happen once or twice or even 3 times during the day. Then I used daily poetic image generation, and this is basically where I chose one single poetic image or phrase to represent that day. Some are better than others, some are more poetic than others, but basically the idea was to boil down my experience of that day to one image. I also use poetry writing. This is autobiographical poetry writing, where I talk about or explain artistically, poetically, to myself, perhaps to others, about my experiences. And finally, I use poetic art journaling. My life partner is an art therapist, and early on in my diagnosis and treatment, she encouraged me to paint and draw and do a range of different things. And this slowly evolved into poetic art journaling, where I had a dedicated journal for exploring and expressing my experiences as I was going through cancer. So with that, let me enter into exemplifying some of this. This is a picture of my actual journal, and I'd like to first start by talking about some of the early stages of diagnosis. So this is a page from my daily journal. On March 16th, 2022, I was diagnosed with cancer. And this had, as you can see, significant effects on my life. And you can see how I responded to this, including writing in German. Ich habe schlechte Nachrichten. Ich bin krank. Ich habe Prostatakrebs. And for me, German is a very poetic language. There's a lot of reasons why I entered into this type of work. So if you want to know what a cancer diagnosis feels like, this is a page I created in my art journal. And as you can see, this is a life-changing event. My actual diagnosis happened on basically one day. I went to a radiologist in the morning, went through tests, saw an oncologist by 4:30 in the afternoon. It was a long day, and I was diagnosed at 4:30 in the afternoon. And my world changed, as you can see here. So as you can see, this is an image of real panic. And this is the representation of the day after my diagnosis. I had a lot of questions. What's important? Who do I tell? What will happen? How do I live? What does it mean to die? Can I be treated? Can my life be prolonged? Things like, what will happen? What can I do? I felt lost, and I asked myself, what can I do? And I asked for help, and I said, please help me. Luckily for me, I have a loving family. I have a very supportive and knowledgeable partner. I have good friends who really turned up for me. And of course, I was in a very, very good healthcare system and in a very good center for cancer treatment, which included psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, social workers, in addition to all the medical professions. And this, we're once again going back to my journal. I got some chemotherapy medication, and it really put me in a not such a good place, in a bad place. And as you can see here, I just want to lie in bed for a week. And then I wrote a short poem, please let me go quietly into the night, no fighting for survival with every breath, but a slow, quiet descent into death. And of course, this is a low point. I was feeling physically, I wasn't feeling well. But then I had a plan for dealing with cancer, and I asked myself, can I write my way through cancer? Will writing help me? I think writing saves me. And I have a history and I have research on writing for well-being, and I thought this was an approach I could take. And also there's a history here. This is a bit ironic. In 2021, when I was in a residency with Marcus Apple at the University of Würzburg, after my father passed away, I wrote the following. I've often thought to myself that as I died, I would have a pen in hand and write out my final thoughts as life slipped away from me. I had thought this to be a form of fantasy, as who knows the moment when one will die. But here my father clearly knew he was dying. His insistence on telling his story, his persistence on having just one sitting for his testimony, the fullness of the presentation. Once he had told the story, he seemed to sigh as if he'd reached an end. The ironic piece here is that, of course, now I'm in a similar situation, and I do have the opportunity of writing in pen and hand as I go through my cancer journey. I started radiation therapy. That, of course, is a quite scary experience. And once again, you can see here comments from my journal. I'd like to relate to the one on April 28th. As I was sitting waiting for treatment, I saw a young man with a woolen hat, a trendy hat, with a breathing tube wheeled in a hospital bed to get radiation treatment. My thought was, wow, that's how I'm going to be at some point. And it was a very scary thought. But then I had other experiences as well. And I was writing poetry. So this is a poem about an experience I had as I lay on the hospital bed under the radiation. My grandmother's hand from beyond the grave caringly straightened a white sheet on my chest, healing the hurt and sadness. My grandmother died in the Holocaust many, many, many years before. But I had this sense of her being close to me whilst I was going through radiation. I had a sense of her coming from beyond the grave and caring for me. And that was very helpful to me. This overall was my type of response to radiation therapy. You can see there was pain, questions about death, panic at some point. I also had a special type of calm sometimes, and I was trying to contend with the incomprehensibility of death. Now let's move to some coping mechanisms, because things do get better over a while. So these are some of the things I thought. So to focus too much on cancer and death will be to miss life, and I'm still alive, and I was still with life. So I'm waiting for cancer to return. I'm scared, like a broken building or, an ominous sign. But still, if you focus too much on cancer, you're not going to live at all. I also tried sort of some mantras like, what I do improves my chances of survival, which I wrote over and over and over again. And I still believe that what I do can help me, gives me a bit of agency. And then there's moments like this. It was a beautiful autumn day, and I live in Pittsburgh, and autumn in Pittsburgh is just awesome. It's beautiful. And I was looking at the trees and enjoying nature. I live by a big park. And then I asked myself, how many more autumns will I see? And then I wrote some poetry like this. I will be nothing but a sad memory as I prematurely enter the autumn of my life. Winter will be brutal, and when I die, people will say, he died after a long battle with cancer. But before I die, I will be with life and not grieve my death while I live. To be with life whilst you die is what life is. And then there's some days in which I had very little hope. And, I recognize that I'm emotionally fragile, and I just sort of gave up hope. But I always chose life in the end. And this is a bit like the experience of a cancer patient when you have a blood test. When you have cancer, a blood test is a slot machine in a casino where the prize is life, and where you know that the house never loses. It's just a matter of time. I also tried to imagine death, and I found this very helpful. If you see my other lectures on imaginative writing, you might get a sense of this. And I found that I could lessen my anxiety. I dreamt I was dying. It was like slowly moving into a deep sleep. There is no pain. I was surprised. Suddenly I understood. I thought that death involved pain, but it was more like falling into a deep sleep. Suddenly I had less fear. There was nothing to fear. Bizarrely, it can be pleasant. My anxiety had lessened. I also have moments like this. If I'm going down in flames, I will dance till the last. And worries. I do not wish to die alone. So thoughts about how you die. And then I had thoughts like this, that death is a betrayal against one's wishes, of one's relationships and commitments to one's loved ones. Death is unforgiving. Death, like all parting, is sad. Don't be angry with me. I tried my best to be with life, and I do everything I can to stay alive. And then I imagined my tumors, sort of what I call a series of resurrection poems. My tumors turned to flowers going towards the sky. The flowers became hands open to the sky. My legs became weightless and my body floated above the table. I could feel my stomach inflate and deflate slowly. And then there were moments where I just noted down things that doctors said to me at different times. In this case, it was a note in which one of my doctors said that I had a worldview of a particular type, and this was a summary. This world is a place of healing. And I think to a large extent, I do have a sense of that. even though the world looks like it's on fire at the moment. And every day I ask myself, where am I emotionally and physically? And I answer that in writing. Every day I'm thankful that I'm alive. Every day I try to do things that are meaningful. Every day I seek calm. And every day I write. And I'm happy to say that at this moment in time, my cancer is in remission. It's under control. Medically, it's under control. And I'm in the space between life and death. And with that, let me end with a haiku. The babushka is structurally sound, but emotionally fractured. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing or hearing your comments. Be well.